The rancher paid $40 for a Comanche woman on a Tuesday morning, and by sunset, smoke signals were rising from every ridge for 30 miles. He didn't know what they meant, but in 7 days he would understand that he'd just bought himself a war he could never win. Before we ride into this storm, hit that subscribe button below and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love hearing from listeners across the frontier and beyond. Now let's begin. The town of Redemption sat like a broken promise at the edge of the Llano Estacado, where the last of the green grass surrendered to endless sky. It was April of 1878, and the dust tasted like copper and old regret. On the north side of the square, beneath a cottonwood that had seen too many hangings, a trader named Virgil Cobb stood beside a wagon with iron-barred sides, calling out prices for human merchandise like he was selling livestock, which by the laws of Texas and the conscience of most men present, he essentially was. Apache boy, 12 years, strong back, no English. $20. Kiowa girl, maybe 14, good for kitchen work or breeding stock. $35 and she's yours, no questions. Thomas Brennan stood at the edge of the small crowd, his hat pulled low, his jaw working a piece of straw he'd been chewing since dawn. He hadn't come to town for this. He'd come for fence wire and seed, maybe ammunition if he had money left over, which he wouldn't. The Bartu Ranch was hemorrhaging money the way a gut-shot animal bleeds, slow, steady, and fatal. 3 years of drought had turned his grassland to dust. Cattle prices had collapsed. His wife Mary had died of fever the previous winter, leaving him with 2 ranch hands, 1,000 acres of worthless dirt, and a mortgage that would come due in 6 months. He should have walked away. But then Virgil Cobb opened the last cage, and Thomas Brennan's future changed forever. She stepped down from the wagon without assistance, her movements controlled and deliberate, like she was descending from a stage rather than a prison. She wore a simple cotton dress, sun-faded and torn at the hem, but she wore it like armor. Her hair was black as gunpowder and fell past her shoulders, unbound. Her face was unmarked, unbroken, and when she looked out at the crowd of white men evaluating her like a horse at auction, her eyes held something that made Thomas shift his weight uncomfortably. Not fear, not submission, observation. "Now here's the prize of the lot, gentlemen," Virgil Cobb announced, his voice taking on the practiced enthusiasm of a confidence man closing a deal. Comanche female, maybe 18, 19 years old. Took her off a supply train right up north of the Brazos. She's educated, speaks English, Spanish, and her own devil tongue. Writes a little too, if you can believe it. Some missionary got hold of her when she was young, tried to civilize her before she went back to the blanket. He grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. Didn't take, obviously, but you'll find her more useful than most. She can cook so, and she ain't been damaged, if you follow my meaning. I kept her separate from the others. The way he said it made Thomas's stomach turn. A voice from the crowd, "How much, Cobb?" "For this one, $60. And worth every penny, $60. Thomas had $47 in his pocket, the last of his cash money. It was supposed to buy the wire and seed that might let him plant a kitchen garden, maybe grow enough to get through another winter. He should have walked away. 40, Thomas heard himself say. The crowd turned. Virgil Cobb's eyes found him, calculating. "This ain't a negotiation, friend. It is now $40. Cash money right here." Thomas pulled the folded bills from his vest pocket, held them up. The woman's eyes shifted to him. For just a moment, her expression changed, not hope, not gratitude, but something stranger. Like she was solving an equation. Like she was filing information away for later use. Virgil Cobb spat into the dust. "You got any idea what I paid for her?" "I know what she's worth to you right now," Thomas said quietly. "Which is whatever you can get before the law starts asking questions about where you're getting." Comanche prisoners in 1878, 3 years after the Red River War supposedly ended. A long silence. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. The cottonwood leaves rattled in the hot wind. 45. Cobb said finally. "And you take her as is. No refunds, no complaints." Thomas didn't have $45. But he saw the look in the other men's eyes, saw them weighing their own offers, and he thought about what would happen to this woman if she went home with any of them. "Throw in that old saddle blanket in your wagon, and you got a deal." Cobb laughed, relieved to be closing the sale. "Hell, take 2 blankets." "She's yours." Thomas counted out $40, then added 5 more that he'd been keeping separate emergency money. Mary had called it, back when Mary was alive, to call anything anything. He took the receipt Cobb scrawled on a piece of butcher paper, took the blankets, and walked toward the woman. She watched him approach with the absolute stillness of a cat watching a snake. "Ma'am," Thomas said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away, "I'm Thomas Brennan. I've got a ranch about 12 miles south of here. I won't." "I'm not." He cleared his throat, aware of how inadequate words were. "You'll be safe there." "You have my word." She looked at him for a long moment, and Thomas had the unsettling sensation of being evaluated against some standard he didn't understand. Then she said, in English that carried only the faintest accent, "Your word means nothing to me," but she walked toward his horse anyway. They rode south through the afternoon heat, Thomas on his roan gelding, the woman on the spare horse he'd brought for hauling supplies he'd never bought. He didn't tie her hands, didn't hobble her. The town was 12 miles behind them, and if she wanted to run, she could run. He wouldn't chase her. Couldn't, even if he wanted to. She looked like she could ride, and his gelding was 20 years old if it was a day. But she didn't run. They rode in silence for the first hour. The land opened up around them, rolling prairie dotted with mesquite and sage. The sky was so big it hurt to look at, pale blue fading to white at the horizons. Thomas kept expecting her to say something, ask something, but she simply rode, her back straight, her eyes moving constantly across the landscape. Reading it, Thomas realized. She was reading the land the way he might read a newspaper. "There's water at the ranch," he said finally, unable to bear the silence any longer. "A good well, spring-fed. Food, 2 beans and salt pork, mostly. But there's deer if you know where to look. My men are decent. Rough, but decent." "They won't bother you." She said nothing. "I know this isn't. I know you didn't choose this, but I'll treat you fair. You'll work. I can't afford to feed anyone who doesn't, but I'll pay you wages when I can. And when I can afford it, when I've got the money, I'll help you get wherever you want to go. That's a promise." "Your promises mean nothing to me," she said again, but this time there was something different in her voice. Not quite belief, but curiosity maybe. "What's your name?" Thomas asked. A long pause. Then, "The missionaries called me Sarah. My people call me something you cannot pronounce. What should I call you?" She glanced at him, and for the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across her face. "Sarah will do." For now, they rode on. What Thomas Brennan didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that Sarah had been watching him in town, had seen him separate from the crowd, had marked the worn patches on his clothes, the careful way he counted his money, the hesitation before he spoke, had evaluated him not as a buyer, but as a variable in a much larger equation. What Thomas Brennan didn't know was that Sarah had not been captured in a raid. She had been sold, yes, but by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. What Thomas Brennan didn't know was that high in the Caprock Canyons, 40 miles to the west, a Comanche war leader named Nakai was already being told about the purchase. About the white rancher who had bought a woman for $40 and taken her south. About the land that rancher claimed and what lay beneath it. What Thomas Brennan didn't know was that the smoke signals rising from the ridges weren't warnings. They were coordinates. And what Thomas Brennan didn't know, what he wouldn't understand until it was almost too late, was that Sarah had been counting on someone exactly like him to make exactly that purchase. Because sometimes, the best way to infiltrate a fort is to let them buy you. The Bartu Ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood. It wasn't much a main house built from adobe and weathered timber. A barn that leaned slightly to the east, a corral that needed mending, and a bunkhouse where his two remaining hands slept. But it was home, or what passed for home now that Mary's garden had died, and her curtains had faded to gray in the relentless sun. As they rode into the yard, two men emerged from the barn. Charlie Hoskins, 40 years old and bow-legged from a lifetime in the saddle, stopped in his tracks when he saw Sarah. Beside him, young Miguel Reyes, barely 20, still carrying the optimism of youth like a disease he hadn't recovered from, let out a low whistle. "Boss," Charlie called out, his hand drifting unconsciously toward the pistol on his hip. "What have you got there?" "Her name is Sarah," Thomas said, dismounting. "She'll be staying on, working for her keep. I want you both to treat her respectful, you understand me?" Charlie's weathered face creased with concern. "Thomas, you can't just—" "I can, and I did." Thomas helped Sarah down from her horse, noting that she didn't need the help, but accepted it with the same careful calculation she seemed to bring to everything. "She speaks English. She worked the house, help with cooking and mending. Anyone has a problem with that, they can draw their pay and ride out." Miguel, who had been staring at Sarah with undisguised interest, snapped his mouth shut and found somewhere else to look. Charlie just shook his head slowly, like a man watching a friend walk into a tornado. "Your funeral, boss," Charlie muttered. "Show her to the spare room off the kitchen," Thomas said. "The one that used to be Mary's sewing room. She need water for washing, and find her some proper clothes, if we've got any that'll fit." Sarah spoke for the first time since they'd arrived. "I can get my own water. And these clothes are sufficient. The well's around back," Thomas said. "Kitchen's through that door. Help yourself to whatever you need. We eat at sundown." She looked at him again with that same evaluating gaze, then nodded once and walked toward the house, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going, despite having never been there before. Charlie waited until she was inside, then turned to Thomas with the expression of a man who'd just watched his friend volunteer for a firing squad. "You've lost your damn mind." "Probably," Thomas agreed. "You know what she is?" "I know what she was sold as. I also know what'll happen to her if I left her in Cobb's hands. That ain't your problem, Thomas." "It is now." Charlie spat tobacco juice into the dust. "You realize she's Comanche, right? Not Apache, not some peaceful Pueblo Indian. Comanche, the folks who've been raiding this territory for 200 years. The folks who killed the Martins up in Palo Duro last fall. The folks who'd just as soon stake you to an anthill as look at you. I know what Comanche are, Charlie. Do you? Do you really?" Charlie stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Because what I know is that Comanche don't forget. You got a Comanche woman under your roof. Someone out there is going to come looking for her. And when they do, they won't be bringing flowers and thank you notes." Thomas started unsaddling his horse, keeping his hands busy so he wouldn't have to look at Charlie's face and see his own doubts reflected there. "Then they'll come, and we'll deal with it." "We," Charlie repeated flatly. "We, Thomas, I've known you 15 years. I rode with you in the cavalry, fought beside you at Adobe Walls, helped you build this ranch from nothing. But I got to tell you, friend to friend, this is the dumbest thing you've ever done. And that includes the time you tried to break that Mustang stallion that put you through a fence. Note it. I'm serious, Thomas. This ain't charity work. This is you buying a war you can't afford and can't win." Thomas finished with the saddle, turned to face his oldest friend. "You want to draw your pay and ride out, Charlie. I'll understand. I won't hold it against you." Charlie glared at him for a long moment, then shook his head in disgust. $47 in back wages says I'm staying. But when the Comanche show up, and they will show up, don't say I didn't warn you." He stalked off toward the bunkhouse, leaving Thomas alone in the yard with Miguel, who'd been silent through the whole exchange. "Senator Brennan," Miguel said quietly. "Charlie's right. This is dangerous, I know." But Miguel hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "But it was also the right thing to do. What Cobb does, selling people like that, it's wrong. My grandmother, she was taken by Comanche when she was young. Lived with them for 5 years before she escaped. She told me stories. They're not all devils like people say. They're just people. Different people, but people. Thomas felt something in his chest loosen slightly. Thank you, Miguel. I'm still scared, though. That makes 2 of us. Thomas headed toward the house, wondering what exactly he'd brought home, and what price he'd eventually pay for $40 and a moment of conscience in a dusty town square. Behind him, Miguel stood in the yard, looking west toward the darkening horizon. And if he'd had eyes sharp enough, if he'd known where to look, he might have seen what Charlie and Thomas had both missed, the thin column of smoke rising from the ridgeline, 5 miles distant. One column, straight and narrow, like a finger pointing at the sky, the signal that meant, target acquired. Position confirmed. Wait for orders. Sarah stood in the small room off the kitchen, taking in her new prison with the same careful attention she'd given everything since Virgil. Cobb had pulled her from the wagon that morning. The room was sparse and narrow bed with a cornhusk mattress, a small table with a wash basin, a single window that looked out over the empty prairie. The walls showed the faded outlines where pictures had once hung, and in the corner sat a wooden crate filled with fabric scraps and spools of thread, covered in dust. A dead woman's room, Sarah thought. She could smell it, the ghost of lavender water and sadness. She sat on the bed, testing its strength, then rose and went to the window. The glass was wavy with age, distorting the view, but she could see well enough. The barn to the left, the corral to the right, and beyond them, the endless sweep of prairie rolling toward the Caprock country where her people had lived for generations, before the white man came with his promises and his broken treaties and his endless, gnawing hunger for land. 3 men. One old, one young, one complicated. Thomas Brennan, the one who'd bought her, was the complicated one. She'd seen men like him before, men, caught between what they'd been taught and what they believed, between the world as it was and the world as it should be. He had kind eyes, but kind eyes meant nothing. She'd known white men with kind eyes who'd signed treaties one day and burned villages the next. Kindness in a white man was like rain in the desert, welcome when it came, but never something you could count on. Still, he hadn't tied her, hadn't touched her, hadn't even tried to claim the rights that white law said he'd purchased along with her body. That was interesting. Sarah touched the glass of the window, feeling the heat trapped there from the day's sun. In the reflection, she could see herself dark-skinned, dark-eyed, dressed in the cotton dress of a captive. But that wasn't who she was. That wasn't who she'd ever been. Her people called her Tuinip, she who sees ahead. The missionaries had called her Sarah and tried to teach her that her people's ways were savage, that civilization meant corsets and scripture, and the subjugation of women to men, of brown skin to white, of the natural world to the plow and the fence. They'd taught her English and Spanish, taught her to read and write, taught her geography and arithmetic and the names of white men's gods. What they'd never understood was that she was using them, learning, observing, preparing. When she'd returned to her people at 14, she'd brought back more than just mission school knowledge. She'd brought back an understanding of how the white mind worked, how white law worked, how the machinery of conquest operated. She'd become valuable to her people in ways the missionaries could never have imagined, a translator not just of words, but of worlds. And now, at 23, she'd volunteered for the most dangerous mission her people had ever conceived. Because Thomas Brennan's ranch sat on land that the whites called the Bartee, but that her people knew by another name entirely. Puku, Pia Bitter Water Place, where the last free Comanche band had hidden their families during the Red River War, where sacred objects were buried. Where, if the stories were true, something far more valuable than gold or cattle lay waiting beneath the earth, waiting for the wrong hands to find it, or the right hands to protect it. 3 months ago, Nakai, the war leader who'd once been her brother's closest friend, and who now led the last band of Comanche still resisting the reservation, had learned that Thomas Brennan had filed a claim on Bitter Water Place, that he was planning to dig a new well. that he might stumble onto what lay beneath. The whites couldn't be allowed to find it. But neither could Nakaye's band simply attack the ranch. It would bring the cavalry, bring more violence, bring the final destruction of her people's freedom. So Sarah had proposed a different strategy. Let me go in first. Let me see what kind of man he is. Let me find out what he knows, what he plans, what can be stopped without blood. It had taken weeks of planning. The staged capture by Virgil Cobb's men, who thought they were raiding a Comanche camp, but were actually taking exactly the prisoner that had been left for them to find. The careful management of the sale, making sure she ended up on that wagon, in that town, on that day. The gamble that someone with at least a spark of conscience would buy her. And then the even bigger gamble, that she could survive long enough in the white man's world to complete her mission. Sarah heard footsteps approaching the door. She turned from the window, arranging her face into neutral lines, as Thomas Brennan knocked softly. "Come in," she said. He opened the door but didn't enter, just stood in the doorway like a man approaching a wolf den. "I brought you some clothes." They were my wife's, she was. She was about your size. He held out a bundle, 2 dresses, both faded but clean, and a shawl. Sarah took them, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. His hands were calloused, scarred, the hands of a man who worked his own land rather than simply owning it. "Your wife is dead," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "Last winter, fever. I'm sorry." Thomas looked surprised, like he hadn't expected sympathy from her. "Thank you. She was a good woman. Better than I deserved." He cleared his throat. "Anyway, supper's in an hour. You're welcome to join us, or I can bring you a plate." "I'll join you." Another flicker of surprise. "All right then." He started to turn away, then paused. "Sarah, why didn't you run? Out on the trail when we were riding here, you could have run." "I wouldn't have chased you." Sarah met his eyes, and for just a moment, she let him see something true. "Where would I run to, Mr. Brennan?" "The nearest reservation is 200 miles north. The nearest Comanche band that might take me in. I don't know where. This land is all fences and white men now. Running doesn't change that." "I suppose not," Thomas said quietly. "But still, for what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed." After he left, Sarah stood alone in the room, holding the dead woman's dresses, and allowed herself a moment of something that might have been guilt. "I'm sorry," she thought, to the ghost that lingered in this room. "I'm sorry I'm wearing your clothes and sleeping in your bed and lying to your husband. But I'm protecting something more important than his feelings, more important than his ranch, more important, even, than my own life." She changed into one of the dresses, a simple brown cotton that fit well enough, and braided her hair. In the mirror above the wash basin, she looked like exactly what Thomas Brennan thought he'd bought. A Comanche woman trying to adapt to white civilization. Perfect. She went to join them for dinner, and began the next phase of her mission: observation, information gathering, survival, and if necessary, when the time came, sabotage. Dinner was a quiet affair, eaten in the ranch house kitchen around a rough-hewn table that could seat 6 but held only 4. Charlie served up beans and salt pork with cornbread, the standard fare of men who knew nothing about cooking and cared even less. Miguel said grace in Spanish, his voice soft and earnest. Thomas watched Sarah carefully, like a man waiting for a storm. Sarah ate with perfect manners, using the fork and knife the way the missionaries had taught her, neither wolfish nor dainty. She could feel the men's eyes on her, could feel the questions they didn't dare ask. "The food is good," she said, breaking the silence. "Thank you," Charlie grunted. Miguel smiled nervously. Thomas relaxed fractionally. "Tomorrow," Thomas said, "I'll show you around the ranch, where everything is what needs doing. It's not complicated work: cooking, cleaning, mending. If you know how to tend a garden, we'll start one come spring. For now, just make yourself useful however you see fit." "I know gardens," Sarah said. "And I can sew, ride, shoot, if necessary." All 3 men looked up at that. "You can shoot?" Miguel asked. A missionary teacher believed women should know how to defend themselves. He taught me to use a rifle. This was true, though Brother Marcus had never understood that Sarah was already one of the best shots in her band by the time she arrived at the mission. She'd let him think he was teaching her, while really she was learning the specific mechanisms of white men's weapons. Well, Thomas said carefully, I don't expect there'll be much call for shooting around here. But it's good to know, I suppose. Charlie pushed his plate away, his face dark. Can I speak plain, boss? When have you ever done otherwise? I don't trust this, Charlie said, looking directly at Sarah. No offense to you, ma'am, but I've lived on this frontier for 30 years, and I know how Comanche operate. You're smart, educated, pretty, which means you're valuable. Which means someone's gonna come looking for you. And when they do, I want to know whose side you're on. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. Mr. Hoskins, I understand your concern. You see me as a threat because I'm Comanche, and Comanche have killed white men. But by that same logic, I should see all of you as threats because white men have killed Comanche, many Comanche, my people, my family. That's different, is it? We're trying to build civilization out here. Your people are trying to stop it. Your civilization requires my people to disappear, Sarah said quietly, to surrender our land, our ways, our freedom, to live on reservations where we starve on government rations and wait to die. Is that the civilization you're building? Because if so, yes, we're trying to stop it. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Thomas raised a hand. All right, that's enough. Charlie, I appreciate your concerns, but Sarah's here now and she's under my protection. No one's taking her anywhere she doesn't want to go. Sarah, I understand your anger, but Charlie's right about one thing: we need to know where everyone stands. Sarah turned to Thomas. You want to know where I stand? I'll tell you. I stand nowhere. I belong nowhere. My people don't want me because I spent too much time with whites. Whites don't want me because I'm Comanche. I'm caught between two worlds, fitting in neither. So when you bought me today, Mr. Brennan, you didn't buy a warrior or a spy or a threat. You bought a woman with nowhere else to go. That's where I stand. It was a beautiful lie. Sarah had practiced it for weeks, honing the right mixture of bitterness and resignation, strength and vulnerability. She could see it working on Thomas, could see him softening, his white man's guilt blooming like a poison flower. I'm sorry, Thomas said. I can't imagine what that's like. No, Sarah agreed. You can't. Miguel broke the heavy silence. I think we should give her a chance. Everyone deserves a chance. Miguel's young and stupid, Charlie said. But for once, I agree with him. A chance. But I'll be watching, ma'am. No offense, none taken. After dinner, Sarah helped wash the dishes, an act of domesticity that seemed to reassure the men, then excused herself to her room. She could hear them talking in low voices after she left, could imagine the debate playing out. Charlie suspicious, Miguel sympathetic, Thomas conflicted. Good. Conflict was useful. Conflict meant hesitation. And hesitation meant time. In her room, Sarah waited until full dark, until the ranch fell silent except for the normal sounds of night coyotes in the distance, wind through the eaves, the restless shifting of horses in the corral. Then she went to her window and opened it slowly, carefully, making no sound. She stood there for exactly 60 seconds, visible in the moonlight. Then she closed the window, latched it, and went to bed. 5 miles away, on a ridge that overlooked the Barty Ranch, a young Comanche scout named Pia lowered his field glasses stolen from a dead cavalry officer 3 years ago and turned to his companion. She's there. Window room, east side of the main house. She gave the signal 60 count, no emergency. His companion, an older warrior named Puyuit, he who waits, nodded slowly. And the white men? 3, one old, one young, one who bought her. They're suspicious, but they don't know. Good. Tell Nakai. We wait. We watch, we don't move unless she signals distress. And if she does? Puyuit's smile was not kind. Then we remind these white men why Comanche are feared. They melted back into the darkness, leaving no trace they'd ever been there except for a single stone placed carefully on the ridge, a marker that meant position confirmed, surveillance active. In her room, Sarah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the white man who'd bought her with his last $40 and the mission that was just beginning. She had 2 weeks, maybe 3, to find out what Thomas Brennan knew about Bitterwater Place, to learn his plans for the land, to discover whether he could be reasoned with, bought off, or would have to be removed by other means. And she had to do it all while maintaining the fiction that she was just a displaced Comanche woman grateful for shelter. This is going to be harder than I thought, Sarah admitted to herself, because already she could feel the complications setting in. Thomas Brennan wasn't cruel, wasn't stupid, wasn't the kind of white man she'd been prepared for. He was something much more dangerous. He was decent. And decent men, Sarah had learned, were the hardest ones to predict. She closed her eyes and forced herself to sleep, knowing that tomorrow the real work would begin. Thomas Brennan couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, the bed he'd shared with Mary for 12 years before she died, and stared at the darkness, listening to the sounds of his ranch settling into night, the wind, the horses, the creak of old timber adjusting to the temperature drop. And underneath it all, the awareness that a Comanche woman was sleeping 2 rooms away and that everything had changed. What the hell had he been thinking? Charlie was right. This was insanity. He'd taken the last of his money he desperately needed for supplies and seed and the 100 other things a dying ranch required, and he'd bought a woman he didn't need and couldn't afford. Except that wasn't quite true, was it? He'd needed to buy her. Not in any practical sense, but in some deeper way that he couldn't quite articulate. He'd looked at her standing there in that town square, proud and unbroken despite being sold like property, and something in him had refused to walk away, had refused to let her go to whoever else might bid, had refused to be the kind of man who could witness that kind of wrong and do nothing. Mary would have understood. Mary, who'd once spent their food money to buy medicine for a sick Mexican boy in town, who'd nursed a wounded Kiowa warrior against Thomas's protests, who'd believed that conscience wasn't negotiable regardless of cost. Maybe that's why I did it, Thomas thought. Because Mary's gone, and I'm trying to hold on to the part of me that she made better. But nobility, Thomas knew from hard experience, didn't pay mortgages, didn't make rain fall on drought-stricken land, didn't turn $40 into the fortune he needed to save the Bartee. He rolled over, punched his pillow, tried to find a comfortable position that didn't exist. Tomorrow he'd show Sarah around the ranch, get her started on whatever work she could do, and try to pretend that everything was normal. Try to pretend he hadn't just complicated his life in ways he couldn't begin to calculate. And he'd start planning for the new well. That was the thing that might save him, if anything could, the well. For months, he'd been surveying his land, looking for the best place to dig a new water source. The current well was adequate but shallow, and it ran dry in the worst of the summer heat. But there was a spot, about a mile west of the main house, where the land dipped slightly and the vegetation stayed green, even in drought. Water table had to be closer to the surface there. Had to be. If he could dig a deep well there, get consistent water, he might be able to irrigate enough pasture to support more cattle, might be able to turn things around, might be able to save the ranch that Mary had loved and that he'd promised her dying self he'd never lose. He'd start digging next month, assuming he could afford to hire a crew, assuming his new employee didn't burn the place down in the middle of the night. Thomas smiled grimly at the thought, then felt guilty for it. Sarah hadn't given him any reason for suspicion beyond the simple fact of being Comanche. She'd been polite, respectful, even helpful. Her anger at dinner had been understandable, righteous even. He couldn't blame her for being bitter about her situation. Still, Charlie's words echoed in his mind. Comanche don't forget. Thomas finally drifted toward sleep, his last conscious thought being that tomorrow he'd need to ride into town for supplies, and maybe he'd ask the sheriff if there'd been any Comanche sightings in the area lately. Just to be safe, just to know what he was dealing with. But even as he thought it, some part of him understood that it was already too late for safety. That the moment he'd held up those $40 in Redemption's town square, he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. He just didn't know it yet. High in the Caprock Canyons, in a hidden camp that the cavalry had never found and never would, Naka sat by a small fire and listened to the scout's report. She's in position. No signs of distress. The white man seems confused, not aggressive. Nakai was 40 years old, scarred from a dozen battles, carrying the weight of being one of the last free Comanche leaders in a world that had no place for free Comanche anymore. His face was hard, carved from wind and sun and loss. He'd watched his people forced onto reservations, watched his children die of white man's diseases, watched his world shrink year by year until it was nothing but this hiding in canyons, avoiding patrols, slowly starving while the white man's cattle grew fat on stolen land. But he hadn't given up, wouldn't give up. Not while there was still something left to protect. "Tell me about this white man," Naka said. The one who bought her, the scout Pia, who was young but observant, described Thomas Brennan. The worn clothes, the old horse, the obvious poverty. The way he'd stood apart from the other white men in town, like he didn't quite belong with them. "He's failing," Pia concluded. "His ranch is dying. Charlie Hoskins, the old one, he talks to the other ranch hands when he goes to town. They say Brennan is one bad season away from losing everything." "Good," Nakafi said. "Desperate men make mistakes, or desperate men become dangerous," said a woman's voice from the shadows. Nakai turned to see his sister, Wakari, she who speaks wisely, emerge from the darkness. She was older than Nakai by 2 years, gray-haired now, but still carrying the authority of a woman whose words had guided their band through impossible times. "You think I'm wrong to send Tuanip?" Nakai asked. "I think you're playing a dangerous game. If the white man discovers what lies beneath Bitter Water Place, he'll bring others. But if he discovers that Tuanip is spying for us, he'll bring the cavalry. Either way, we lose. And if we do nothing? If we let him dig his well and find what the ancestors buried there." Wakari sat by the fire, her joints crackling with age. "Then we lose that too. I understand the choice, brother. I simply question whether Tuanip is the right weapon for this fight. She's smart, yes, brave, yes, but she's also young. And she's never killed anyone. She won't have to kill anyone. She's there to observe. To warn us if he discovers the sacred ground. To give us time to respond. And if she's caught, then we deny knowledge of her. Say she was captured years ago, lost to us. That's the agreement we made." Wakari shook her head slowly. "You're asking her to sacrifice everything, her freedom, maybe her life, for a secret that even I don't fully understand. Our grandmother's stories about what lies beneath Bitter Water Place. They're just stories, Nakai. We don't even know if they're true. They're true enough that the elders made us swear never to let the whites dig there. True enough that our people have protected that ground for 3 generations. True enough that I won't be the one to break that covenant." They sat in silence, watching the fire burn down to coals. Finally, Wakari spoke again. "What will you do if Tuanip signals for help? Attack the ranch, drive the white man off, do whatever is necessary. And if she fails, if she's discovered, or if the white man digs anyway?" Nakai's expression went cold. "Then Thomas Brennan will learn why the Comanche held this land for 2 centuries against Spanish, Mexican, and American conquest. He'll learn that some ground is worth dying for, or killing for," Wakari added quietly. "Yes," Nakai agreed. "Or killing for." In the canyon below, 40 warriors slept, 40 men who represented the last free Comanche band, the last holders of the old ways, the last echo of a nation that had ruled the southern plains until the whites came with their endless appetite for land and their relentless machinery of conquest. They were outnumbered, outgunned, running low on ammunition, food, and hope, but they were still here, still free. still willing to fight for the things that mattered. And if Sarah's mission failed, they would remind Thomas Brennan and every other white man within 100 miles that the Comanche had not surrendered. They'd simply been waiting for the right moment to strike back. The first week passed without incident. Sarah fell into the rhythms of ranch life with the ease of someone who'd done manual labor all her life, which, despite the missionaries' attempts at civilization, she had. She cooked simple meals that were better than anything the men had eaten in months. She mended their clothes, patched their torn shirts, sewed buttons back onto Charlie's vest. She cleaned the house, swept the floors, washed the windows until they actually let in light, and she watched. Always watched. She learned that Thomas woke before dawn every morning and walked the perimeter of his land, checking fences and water sources like a man trying to hold sand together with his bare hands. She learned that Charlie drank whiskey in the bunkhouse every night, just enough to numb himself but never enough to get drunk. She learned that Miguel sent half his wages to his mother in San Antonio, and that he was in love with a girl named Rosa who didn't know he existed. She learned the layout of the ranch house, every room and closet and hiding place. She found where Thomas kept his deed and legal papers in a lockbox under his bed. She found where the weapons were stored, a rifle in the parlor, another in the barn, pistols in the men's rooms. She counted ammunition, scarce. Counted food supplies, scarcer. The Barty Ranch was indeed dying, just as Pia had reported. One more drought, one more winter, and Thomas Brennan would lose everything. Which meant he was running out of time. Which meant he'd have to make his move soon, dig his well, find his water, or watch his dream dissolve into dust. Sarah found the surveying equipment on the 4th day, tucked away in a corner of the barn. Stakes and string, measuring chains, a surveyor's level. And beside them, a map of the ranch with a spot marked about a mile west of the house, circled in pencil. The exact location of Bitterwater Place. So he's already chosen, Sarah thought, her heart rate picking up despite her outward calm. He doesn't know what's there, but he's chosen it anyway, because the water table is high, because the vegetation is greener, because the land itself betrays the secret it's supposed to hide. She carefully put everything back exactly as she'd found it, then went back to the house and continued cooking dinner like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The deadline wasn't months away. It was weeks, maybe days. As soon as the weather improved, Thomas would start digging. And once he started, he'd discover what the Comanche had hidden there 100 years ago. That night, Sarah stood at her window for exactly 90 seconds, the signal for urgent, but not emergency, need to make contact soon. 2 nights later, she woke to the sound of a pebble striking her window. She rose silently, opened the window, and found a small leather pouch on the sill. Inside was a message written on doeskin in the pictograph language her people had used for centuries. Ridge behind the north pasture. 3 nights from now. Midnight. Come alone if safe. Don't come if watched. Sarah burned the message in her room's small lantern, crushed the ash to powder, and scattered it to the wind. She had 3 days to figure out how to get away from the ranch at midnight without anyone noticing. 3 days to report to Nakai that time was running out. 3 days before the second phase of the mission began. Thomas noticed the change on the 8th day. Nothing obvious. Nothing he could point to and say, there, that's different. But something had shifted. Sarah was more distant, more distracted. She still did her work perfectly, still spoke politely, still acted the role of grateful employee. But there was a tension in her shoulders now, a sharpness to the way she looked at things when she thought no one was watching. Like a person preparing for something. You see it too? Charlie asked, catching Thomas in the barn. See what? Her. She's different, nervous. Maybe she's just settling in. Or maybe she's heard something we haven't, Charlie said. Maybe her people are nearby. You're imagining things. Am I? Charlie grabbed Thomas's arm. Listen to me, boss. I've lived through 3 Comanche uprisings. I know the signs. The way the land gets quiet. The way animals act skittish for no reason. The way you get this feeling on the back of your neck like someone's watching." He paused. "I've had that feeling for 3 days now." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. "You think they're out there?" "I think something's out there. Could be Comanche. Could be bandits. Could be nothing but my imagination and old age making me paranoid. But I also think that if you're planning to start digging that new well next week, like you said, you might want to reconsider." "I can't reconsider. I dig that well or I lose the ranch. Those are the choices. Then hire more men. Get some protection." Because if... Charlie stopped mid-sentence, his eyes fixed on something past Thomas's shoulder. Thomas turned to see Sarah standing in the barn doorway, a basket of eggs in her hands. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not interrupting," Thomas said, wondering how much she'd heard. "Everything all right?" "Yes, I just..." She hesitated, and Thomas saw something flicker across her face. Something that might have been conflict, or might have been fear. "I was wondering if I might ride out tomorrow." "Not far, just beyond the north pasture. I'd like to..." She paused again. "I'd like to see the land. It's been 2 weeks since I've really seen open country." "Alone?" Charlie asked sharply. If that's permitted, Thomas and Charlie exchanged a look. "Take Miguel with you," Thomas said finally. "Not because I don't trust you, but because this isn't safe country for anyone to ride alone. Man or woman, Comanche or white." Sarah's jaw tightened fractionally. "As you wish." She left with her basket of eggs, and Charlie turned back to Thomas with an expression that said, "I told you so," without words. "She's meeting someone," Charlie said flatly. "You don't know that. I know enough. She wants to ride out alone, toward the back country, right when I'm getting that watched feeling." "That's not coincidence, Thomas. So what do you want me to do? Lock her in her room? Chain her to the kitchen? I want you to be smart. She's Comanche, Thomas. Her loyalty isn't to you, isn't to this ranch, isn't to any white man's law. Her loyalty is to her people. And if her people are out there, and I think they are, then we're sitting in the middle of something we don't understand." Thomas leaned against a stall, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. The mortgage, the drought, the woman sleeping in his house who might or might not be planning to betray him. The well he needed to dig in the exact spot that would save his ranch or destroy it. "What would you do?" he asked quietly. "If you were me?" Charlie considered for a long moment. "Honestly? I'd cut my losses. Sell what's left, move to town. Find some work that doesn't require me to sleep with one eye open. This ranch is killing you, Thomas. Mary's death near broke you. The drought finished the job. And now you've brought a Comanche woman into your home, and you're planning to dig a well that might draw every warrior in 100 miles down on your head. It's too much. It's just too damn much. I can't leave. I promised Mary. Mary's dead, Thomas. She'd understand. Would she?" Thomas pushed away from the stall, anger flaring. Would she understand me giving up? Running away? Letting some bank in Dallas take the land we built together? Because I don't think she would. I think she'd tell me to fight, to hold on, to finish what we started. Even if it kills you? Especially if it kills me. Charlie shook his head slowly. "You're a damn fool, Thomas Brennan. Probably, but you're a loyal damn fool. I'll give you that." Charlie clapped him on the shoulder. "All right, we stay, we watch, we be careful. And when you dig that well, we dig it armed and ready. Agreed?" "And the Comanche woman?" Thomas thought about Sarah's face in the barn doorway, the conflict he'd seen there. "We watch her too, but we don't assume." "Not yet. You're too trusting, and you're too suspicious. Maybe together we'll get it right." That night, Thomas couldn't sleep again. He lay in bed, listening to the wind, and wondered what he'd set in motion by spending $40 in a dusty town square. And he wondered if Sarah was lying awake too, in her room 2 doors down, planning something he couldn't prevent and couldn't understand. He was right on both counts. Sarah stood at her window, watching the moon rise over the prairie, and made her decision. She couldn't meet Nakai in 3 nights. Miguel would report her every movement, and even if she managed to slip away, the men would notice, would wonder, would watch her even more closely afterward. But she also couldn't ignore the summons, which meant she needed another plan, a riskier plan. A plan that would require her to trust Thomas Brennan with at least part of the truth. And as she stood there in the moonlight, wearing a dead woman's dress in a dead woman's room, Sarah realized that the mission had just become infinitely more complicated than anyone had imagined. Because somewhere along the way, in the past 8 days of cooking and cleaning and watching, she'd started to see Thomas not as an obstacle or a target, but as a person. A flawed, struggling, decent person trying to hold on to something he loved. Just like she was. And that made everything so much harder than it had any right to be. 3 mornings later, Sarah made her move. She waited until after breakfast, when Charlie had ridden out to check the fence line and Miguel was in the barn. She found Thomas in the parlor, going over his accounts with the expression of a man counting his own execution. "Mr. Brennan, may I speak with you?" He looked up, and she saw the wariness in his eyes. He'd been watching her more carefully lately, she knew, had noticed her tension. But he'd also been kind, in his awkward way giving her space, asking if she needed anything, treating her like a person rather than property. "Of course, sit down." Sarah remained standing. What she was about to do required her to maintain some semblance of dignity. "I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen without interrupting, without judgment, until I'm finished." Thomas set down his pencil, his expression going carefully neutral. "All right, I lied to you. When I said I had nowhere to go, when I said I was caught between 2 worlds and belonged to neither, that was a lie. I have people. I have a place. I belong very much to my world, Mr. Brennan, and I came here deliberately." She watched his face carefully, saw the understanding dawn there. Not surprise, she noted. He'd suspected. Maybe not consciously, but some part of him had known. "Why?" he asked simply. "Because your ranch sits on land my people consider sacred. Land where important things are buried. Things that must be protected. What things? I can't tell you that. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Thomas stood slowly, his hand moving unconsciously toward the pistol he kept in the parlor desk. "Are you threatening me?" "No, I'm warning you. In 3 days, I need to meet with someone. If I don't, if I miss that meeting, they'll assume I'm being held against my will, and they'll come for me. They'll come with force, Mr. Brennan, with violence. And people will die, probably including you and your men. Who are they? People who matter to me. People I won't betray, no matter what you do to me." Thomas's jaw tightened. "You're asking me to let you ride out and meet with Comanche warriors?" "Yes. And then what? You'll come back? Or will you disappear? And I'll wake up to find my barn burning and my men dead?" Sarah took a step closer, and she saw Thomas tense. But she kept her hands visible, her posture open. "I will come back. You have my word. Your word." Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You just admitted you've been lying to me since the day we met." "I lied about my purpose. I didn't lie about who I am. And I'm telling you now, Mr. Brennan, because—" She paused, surprised by her own hesitation. "Because you deserve at least that much honesty. You bought me. You could have used me the way Cobb expected you to, the way most white men would. But you didn't. You treated me with respect, with kindness. And that makes you different. Different enough to trust? I don't know. But different enough that I'm trying." They stood there in the parlor, 2 people from different worlds, different stories, caught in a moment that would determine everything that came next. Finally, Thomas spoke. "What's buried on my land, Sarah? What's so important that your people are willing to kill for it?" "I can't tell you. Can't or won't. Both. That's not good enough. It's all I can offer." Thomas turned away, walked to the window, stared out at his dying ranch. When he spoke again, his voice was tired. "I'm planning to dig a well. About a mile west of here, in the low ground where the grass stays green. I've surveyed it, measured it, and I'm starting in 2 weeks. That well is the only thing that might save this place. Without it, I lose everything Mary and I built. Everything I promised her I'd protect. He turned back to Sarah. Is that well going to be a problem? Sarah felt her heart sink. Yes. Why? Because that's the exact spot, the exact ground that my people have been protecting for 3 generations. What's there? Gold? Silver? Ancient artifacts? Something more important than any of those. What could be more important than gold? Memory, Sarah said quietly. History, the proof that we existed here, that we mattered here, before you came. The proof that this land was ours by right of blood and time, not just your pieces of paper. Thomas's expression shifted. Not quite understanding, but closer to it. You're talking about a burial ground, among other things. How many others? How big? Big enough. Important enough. Sacred enough. Thomas walked back to his desk, sank into his chair like a man carrying the weight of the world. So what you're telling me is that the one spot, the one single spot on the entire ranch that might save me, is the one spot I absolutely cannot touch. Yes, and if I dig there anyway, then my people will stop you. By whatever means necessary. War, you mean. I mean protection. Defense. Call it what you want. Thomas rubbed his face with both hands, and Sarah saw in that gesture all the exhaustion and desperation of a man who'd run out of options. You understand what you're asking? You're asking me to choose between my survival and your people's. What? Sacred ground? Buried secrets? I'm asking you to understand that some things matter more than profit, more than land ownership, more than your survival or mine. Easy to say when it's not your life on the line. My life is on the line, Mr. Brennan. It has been since the moment I agreed to this mission. If I'm discovered, if you turn me over to the cavalry, if I fail, I die. So don't tell me I don't understand stakes. They stared at each other across the desk, across the impossible distance between their worlds. What do you want from me? Thomas asked finally. Let me meet with my people in 3 nights. Let me tell them that you know about the sacred ground. Let me try to negotiate something, some arrangement, that doesn't end in bloodshed. And if I say no, then in 3 nights when I don't show up, they'll attack. And you'll wake up to smoke and gunfire and men dying in your yard. Is that what you want? Of course not. Then trust me, just this once. Just enough to let me try. Thomas stood again, paced the small room like a caged animal. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of risks and options. Could see him measuring her words against everything he'd been taught about Comanche, about Indians, about trust. Finally, he stopped, looked at her with eyes that had seen too much disappointment. If I let you go and you come back, will you tell me the truth? All of it? What's buried there? Why it matters what can be done? I'll tell you what I can. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Thomas nodded slowly, like a man accepting a sentence. All right. 3 nights from now, midnight, you ride out. Alone, you meet whoever you're meeting, and you come back by dawn. If you're not back by dawn, he paused. If you're not back by dawn, I'll assume the worst. And I'll take appropriate action. Which means I'll ride to the nearest cavalry post and tell them everything. About you, about your people, about sacred ground and buried secrets. I'll bring enough soldiers down on this area to blanket every canyon and ridge for 50 miles. Is that clear? Sarah felt her stomach turn. That was exactly what they'd hoped to avoid: cavalry involvement, massive searches, the final destruction of Nakai's band. But she also understood Thomas's position. He was giving her enormous trust. He deserved the leverage of a credible threat. Clear, she said. Good, then we have an understanding, yes, Sarah? Thomas said as she turned to leave. Why are you telling me this? You could have just run. Taken a horse. Disappeared in the night. Why risk telling me the truth? She paused in the doorway, considering her answer carefully. Finally, she gave him the only truth that mattered. Because you deserve better than betrayal. Mr. Brennan, You've treated me with more decency in 2 weeks than most white men have shown me in my entire life. And whatever happens next, I wanted you to know that I saw that it mattered." She left him standing in the parlor, surrounded by his papers and his debts and his impossible choices. And as she walked back to the kitchen to continue her work, Sarah realized that she'd just made the mission infinitely more complicated, but also infinitely more honest. Now came the hard part, explaining to Nake why she'd told a white rancher about the sacred ground and hoping he didn't kill her for it. Charlie returned from checking the fence line just before dinner, and he knew immediately that something had changed. The air felt different, tighter, like a storm gathering. He found Thomas in the barn, saddling his horse with the jerky movements of an angry man. "What happened?" "I'm riding into town. Need to talk to the sheriff." "About what?" Thomas cinched the saddle strap harder than necessary. "About Comanche activity in the area. About what the law says regarding sacred ground and property rights. About what options I have when my land apparently sits on something people are willing to kill for." Charlie went very still. "She told you?" "Yeah, she told me. And in 3 nights I'm letting her ride out to meet with her people, alone." "Jesus Christ, Thomas. Are you insane?" "Probably." Thomas mounted his horse, looked down at Charlie with an expression somewhere between determination and despair. "But if I don't let her go, they'll attack. And if they attack, people die. Maybe us, maybe them, definitely someone. So I'm choosing to trust her, to give her a chance to work something out." "You're trusting a Comanche." "I'm trusting a woman who could have disappeared a dozen times and didn't, who just risked everything to tell me the truth when she didn't have to." "Yeah, Charlie. I'm trusting her. And if she's playing you? If this is all some elaborate trap to get our guard down, then I'll die trusting someone I shouldn't have." Thomas pulled his hat down. "But at least I'll die trying to do the right thing. That's more than most men get." He rode off toward town, leaving Charlie standing in the barn, feeling every one of his 40 years plus 20 more. Miguel appeared from the shadows, his young face troubled. "Is it true? She's one of them?" "She's working with them, yeah. And Senator Brennan is letting her go?" "Apparently." Miguel was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "I think he's doing the right thing." "You think he's being stupid?" "No, I think he's being brave." "There's a difference." Miguel stepped into the light, and Charlie saw something in the boy's face that hadn't been there before, a kind of certainty. "My grandmother, when she lived with the Comanche, she said they weren't monsters, weren't savages. They were just people fighting to keep what was theirs. Fighting to protect their families, their way of life. Maybe," he hesitated, "maybe Sarah's people are doing the same thing. Maybe they're not the enemy. Their warriors killed plenty of good men, Miguel, and our soldiers killed plenty of theirs." "Who keeps score in a war like that?" Charlie shook his head. "When did you get so damn philosophical?" "When I realized that maybe the stories we've been told aren't the whole truth." That night, the 3 men and Sarah sat down to dinner in near silence. The food was good. Sarah had made a venison stew with the last of the deer meat Charlie had brought in, but no one tasted it. The tension was thick enough to cut. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. "I rode to town, talked to Sheriff Morrison, asked about property rights and sacred ground." Everyone looked up. "What did he say?" Charlie asked. "He said that according to Texas law, I own the land free and clear. What I do with it is my business. Any interference from Comanche or anyone else is trespassing and can be met with force." Thomas pushed his bowl away. "He also said that if there's any indication of hostile Indian activity in the area, he's obligated to notify the cavalry. Which he'll do, unless I can assure him there's no threat." "And can you?" Charlie asked. Thomas looked at Sarah. "I don't know yet." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "In 3 nights, you'll have your answer. And until then?" "Until then, we all wait." After dinner, Sarah retreated to her room, and the men gathered in the parlor to talk in low voices. Sarah could hear them through the thin walls, Charlie arguing for increased security, Miguel suggesting they try to negotiate, Thomas insisting they give Sarah's plan a chance. She sat on her bed, hands folded in her lap, and tried to organize her thoughts for the meeting with Nakai. She'd have to explain why she'd revealed the mission to Thomas, have to justify breaking protocol, have to convince Nakai that Thomas Brennan was different, that he could be reasoned with, that war wasn't inevitable. And she'd have to do it all while knowing that Nakai had lost too much, seen too much, suffered too much to easily believe in the goodness of any white man. But she had to try, because the alternative, blood and fire and the final destruction of her people's freedom, was unthinkable. Sarah lay back on the bed, closed her eyes, and tried to sleep. Tomorrow she'd continue her work. The day after, the same. And then, on the third night, she'd ride out alone into the darkness to meet with warriors who might see her truth-telling as betrayal. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, she just needed to survive one more day of lying by telling the truth, the strangest paradox she'd ever experienced. In the parlor, Thomas poured himself a whiskey, his first drink since Mary's death. "To foolish decisions," he said, raising his glass to Charlie. "To dying with dignity," Charlie responded, not drinking. Miguel said nothing, just stared into the fire, thinking about his grandmother's stories and wondering if history was about to repeat itself or finally change. Outside, the wind picked up. The stars came out. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the ranch, warriors waited and watched, marking time until the appointed meeting, preparing for whatever came next. War or peace, blood or understanding, the old way or something new. 3 nights would tell. The next morning brought the first crisis. Sarah was in the kitchen, grinding coffee beans, when she heard Miguel's shout from outside. She dropped what she was doing and ran to the window, her heart hammering. Miguel was standing in the yard, staring at something. Thomas and Charlie came running from the barn, guns drawn. Sarah pushed through the door, and then she saw it. Every fence post for 100 yards had been cut, not broken. Cut at exactly the same height, about 2 feet from the ground. The wires sagged uselessly. The horses had wandered out overnight and were scattered across the open prairie. But worse than that was the message. Someone had arranged stones in the center of the yard in a pattern that Sarah recognized immediately, the Comanche symbol for warning. What the hell? Charlie breathed. Thomas turned to Sarah, his face hard. What does this mean? She wanted to lie, wanted to say she didn't know. But she'd promised honesty, and honesty was all she had left now. It means they know I told you. It means they're angry. How did they know? They're watching, always watching. They probably saw us talking yesterday, saw my body language, made the logical assumption. Thomas's jaw worked. So your people did this? Cut my fences? Scattered my livestock? Yes, as a warning. Yes. A warning of what? Sarah looked at the stone pattern, reading the subtle variations that most whites would never see. A warning that I'm running out of time, that they want answers, that if I don't make the meeting in 2 nights, or if they think you're a threat, they'll stop waiting and start acting. Charlie spat. Well, that's just perfect. Now we know for sure they're out there, watching us, and we're supposed to just, what? Pretend everything's fine? We're supposed to not give them a reason to escalate, Sarah said firmly. This is a warning, not an attack. There's a difference. The difference being? The difference being that if they wanted to attack, you'd already be dead. The blunt words hung in the air. Miguel cleared his throat nervously. Should we fix the fences? Yeah, Thomas said. Fix them. Round up the horses. Get things back to normal. He turned to Sarah. And you stay in the house today. Don't go outside unless one of us is with you. Understood? Am I a prisoner now? You're protected. There's a difference. Sarah wanted to argue, but she saw the logic. If Nakai's warriors were watching and growing impatient, her visible movements might provoke them further. Better to lay low, give the impression of compliance, wait for the appointed meeting. All right, she agreed. The men spent the day repairing fences and recovering livestock. Sarah spent it in the house, watching through windows, thinking about what the cut fences really meant. It wasn't just a warning to Thomas, it was a warning to her. You're taking too long. You're getting too close to him. Remember your mission. Remember your people. She understood. But she also understood something that Kai didn't, that missions evolved, that situations changed, that sometimes the person you thought was an enemy turned out to be more complicated than that. Thomas Brennan was complicated. That evening, as they ate another silent dinner, Sarah made a decision. Mr. Brennan, I'd like to teach you something. Everyone looked up. Teach me what? The truth about what's buried on your land. Not all of it. I'm not authorized to share all of it, but enough. Enough that you understand why it matters. Enough that maybe, when I go to that meeting, I can tell my people that you understand. Thomas set down his fork slowly. You're willing to betray your people's secrets? I'm willing to share what's necessary to prevent a war. That's different. How do I know you're telling me the truth? How do I know this isn't just another layer of deception? Sarah met his eyes. You don't. You have to trust me. Same as I'm trusting you not to turn this information over to the cavalry. Charlie made a disgusted sound. This is insane. But Thomas was considering it, Sarah could see. Weighing the risk against the reward. All right, he said finally. After dinner. Just you and me. You tell me what you can. An hour later they sat in the parlor, the door closed, a lantern casting shadows on the walls. Charlie and Miguel were in the bunkhouse, giving them privacy but close enough to respond if needed. Sarah took a breath and began. 130 years ago, before the Spanish came, before the Mexicans, before your people, this land belonged to the Comanche. Not in the way you think of ownership with papers and deeds, but in the way of life. We lived here, hunted here, raised our children here. This was our world. I know the history, Thomas said. You know your version of it. Let me tell you ours. Sarah leaned forward. When the Spanish came, they brought something with them besides horses and guns. They brought a sickness, smallpox. It killed thousands of my people. Entire bands disappeared in a single season. Children, elders, warriors, the disease didn't discriminate. I'm sorry for that. But I don't see what. I'm getting there. Sarah's voice was firm. One of the bands that was hit hardest was led by a man named Pachu, afraid of water. Ironic name, given what happened. His people were dying, and he knew they would all die eventually. So he made a decision. He gathered everything that mattered, everything that proved his people had existed, had mattered, had been more than the savages your historians would later make them out to be, and he buried it. Buried what? Records, pictographs on hide. Stories written in our language. Maps showing our territories, our sacred sites, our history going back generations. Artifacts proving we had trade networks spanning from the Pacific to the Mississippi. Evidence of art, culture, governance, all the things your people say we never had. Thomas frowned. Why would he bury it? Because he knew the whites would come eventually. Knew they would write their own history, tell their own stories, paint us as mindless savages to justify what they did to us. He wanted to preserve the truth. Wanted future generations, Comanche and white alike, to know that we were a great people. That we mattered. And he buried all this at Bitter Water Place, the spot where you want to dig your well. Thomas sat back processing this. So what you're telling me is that under my land is essentially a Comanche historical archive. More than that, it's proof of our civilization, proof of our humanity, proof that we have as much right to be remembered as any European culture. Sarah's voice grew passionate. Your people have museums, libraries, monuments. You write your history in books and preserve it in universities. We had none of that. This burial, this one spot, is all we have left. The only physical proof that we existed as something other than obstacles to your manifest destiny. The room fell silent. Why didn't you just tell the government? Thomas asked finally. Make it an official historical site. Get it protected? Sarah laughed, but it was bitter. Tell the government? The same government that forced us onto reservations? That broke every treaty ever signed? That paid bounties for Comanche scalps? You think they'd protect this? They'd dig it up, put it in some museum back east, charge admission for whites to gawk at it. They'd take the one thing we have left and turn it into a curiosity, a footnote in their version of history. So instead you're planning to fight me for it. No, I'm planning to ask you to leave it alone. To dig your well somewhere else. To let this one piece of ground remain undisturbed. Thomas stood, walked to the window, stared out at the darkness. And if I do that? If I agree to leave Bitterwater Place alone, what happens to my ranch? I've surveyed every inch of this property, Sarah. That's the only spot where the water table is high enough to make a deep well economically feasible. Anywhere else, I'd have to dig twice as deep, spend twice as much. And I don't have that kind of money. Then maybe you sell the land to someone who won't dig there. To who? I'm barely holding onto it as it is. No one wants to buy a drought-stricken ranch in hostile territory. To my people. We'll buy it. Thomas turned, surprise clear on his face. What? We'll buy it. Pay you fair market value. Give you enough money to start over somewhere else. Somewhere you can build without complications. With what money? I thought your people were starving on reservations. Some of us are, but some of us have resources. Saved money, hidden assets. We can put together enough to make you a decent offer. Thomas returned to his chair, looking at her with new eyes. This was the plan all along, wasn't it? You come here, tell me about the sacred ground, make an offer I can't refuse. If I accept, everyone wins. If I don't, you have a war waiting in the wings as backup. It's more complicated than that, is it? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Yes, because I didn't expect you to be what you are, which is reasonable, fair, someone who might actually listen instead of just reacting. She paused. The plan assumed you'd be like every other white rancher in Texas, greedy, violent, dismissive. But you're not, and that changes things. Changes them how? It means I don't want to see you hurt. Don't want to see your ranch burn. Don't want to see my people kill you and your men over a piece of ground when maybe, just maybe, we can work something out that doesn't end in death. Thomas studied her for a long moment. You're asking me to give up everything I've worked for. Everything Mary and I built together. I'm asking you to accept payment for what you built and start over somewhere where the ground isn't cursed with competing claims. This is my home. It was our home first. The words landed hard, true and undeniable. I need to think, Thomas said finally, about your offer, about all of this. It's too much to decide tonight. You have until tomorrow night's meeting. That's when you'll need an answer. And if my answer is no? Sarah stood, smoothed her dress, prepared to return to her room. Then I'll tell my people that I tried. That you know the truth and chose to ignore it. And they'll respond accordingly. War, you mean? Defense of what's theirs. But yes, from your perspective, it'll look like war. After Sarah left, Thomas sat alone in the parlor, his head in his hands, trying to understand how his life had become so impossibly complicated. 2 weeks ago, he'd been a failing rancher with money problems and grief. Now he was negotiating with Comanche over sacred ground, contemplating selling his land, choosing between financial survival and potential bloodshed. All because he'd spent $40 on conscience in a dusty town square. He thought about Mary, wondered what she'd say. Probably something like, "The right thing is rarely the easy thing, Thomas. But it's still right." But what was the right thing here? Honor a dead promise to protect the ranch? Or honor a living obligation to prevent war? He couldn't decide. Not tonight. Tomorrow maybe, after he'd slept on it. After he'd prayed on it. After he'd figured out if selling his land to the Comanche would make him a traitor to his own people, or the only sensible white man in Texas. In her room, Sarah stood at the window, giving the signal. 90 seconds, urgent update. Tomorrow night, she'd ride to meet Nakai. She'd tell him about Thomas's reaction, about his consideration of the offer. About the possibility, just the possibility, that this might end without violence. But she'd also have to tell him that it might not. That Thomas might refuse, that the well might still happen. And she'd have to ask Nake for the one thing he'd find hardest to give. Patience. One more week. One more chance. One more attempt at peace before the old ways took over and turned this ranch into a battlefield. Sarah closed her window, extinguished her lamp, and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would be the longest day of her life. And tomorrow night, everything would change. The sun rose blood red on the morning of the meeting, painting the prairie in shades of crimson and gold. Thomas woke with his decision unmade, his mind churning through scenarios and possibilities like a mill grinding grain. He found Sarah in the kitchen, making coffee, her movements careful and deliberate. "I haven't decided yet," he said without preamble. "I know. I need more time. You don't have it. The meeting is tonight. I need to give my people an answer. Then the answer is I don't know." Thomas poured himself coffee, the steam rising like smoke signals. "I need to see this burial site. Need to understand what's really there. Then maybe I can decide." Sarah shook her head. "I can't authorize that. You're not Comanche. The site is forbidden to outsiders. Then how am I supposed to make an informed decision? You're asking me to give up my life's work based on stories. I need proof. You have my word. Your word isn't enough. Not for this." They stood in the kitchen, the morning light slanting through the windows, and Sarah realized they'd reached an impasse. She needed Thomas to trust her. Thomas needed evidence. Neither could give the other what they required. "I'll ask," Sarah said finally. "Tonight, when I meet with Nakai, I'll ask if you can see the site, but I can't promise anything. Who's Nakai?" Sarah hesitated, then decided on honesty. "The leader of our band. The one who sent me here. The one who'll decide whether we negotiate or fight. Tell me about him." "Why?" "Because if I'm going to negotiate with him, I need to know who I'm dealing with." Sarah poured her own coffee, considering how much to reveal. He's 40 years old. He fought in the Red River War, watched his wife and 2 of his children die of smallpox on the reservation, watched his people be forced from their homes, watched their way of life destroyed. He's one of the last traditional Comanche leaders, the last one who remembers what it was like before. That makes him dangerous, Mr. Brennan, very dangerous. Is he reasonable? He's strategic. He won't attack unless he thinks he can win, or unless he has no other choice. But he also won't back down just because you're white and have the law on your side. He's seen too much, lost too much to care about your laws. Thomas absorbed this. And he trusts you? Trusts your judgment? He trusts my intelligence, but trust. Sarah smiled slightly. Trust is complicated in war, Mr. Brennan. Even when the war is fought with words instead of bullets. The day passed with agonizing slowness. The men worked on reinforcing the barn, preparing for the possibility of attack. Sarah completed her daily tasks, hyper-aware that this might be her last day in the ranch house, her last day playing the role of domestic servant before returning to her true identity. As evening approached, Thomas called everyone together. Tonight, Sarah rides out alone to meet with her people. While she's gone, we maintain a defensive perimeter, but we do not, under any circumstances, provoke an attack. Charlie, you'll take first watch. Miguel, second. I'll take third. We stay alert, stay armed, but we stay peaceful. Clear? Clear, Miguel said. Charlie just grunted, which Thomas took as agreement. Sarah, Thomas continued, you have until dawn. If you're not back by sunup, I ride for the cavalry. That's not a threat, it's a promise. I'm giving you one night to work this out. After that, I do what I have to do to protect my people. Understood. At 11 o'clock, Thomas saddled his fastest horse, a young mare with strong legs and good wind, and brought her to the yard where Sarah waited. She'd changed clothes, he noticed. Instead of Mary's cotton dress, she now wore traditional Comanche clothing, a buckskin dress decorated with beadwork, moccasins, her hair loose and free. She looked like a different person. Like herself, Thomas realized. Like who she'd been all along, underneath the disguise. You look, He paused, searching for the right word. Like your enemy? Sarah supplied. Like someone heading home. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, maybe, or appreciation. Thank you for this. For trusting me. I'm not sure I am trusting you, but I'm trying. That's as close as I can get. Sarah mounted the horse with practiced ease, settling into the saddle like she'd been born there. Which Thomas supposed she had been. One question before you go, Thomas said. If I agree to sell, if I accept your offer and walk away from this land, will you tell me what else is buried there? Besides the historical records? Sarah looked down at him, and in the moonlight, her face was unreadable. What makes you think there's something else? Because people don't prepare for war over historical records, Sarah. There's something more. Something valuable enough to kill for. A long silence. If you sell, Sarah said finally, I'll tell you, but only then. And only because you'll have earned the right to know. That's fair, is it? Or is it just another way of saying I still don't fully trust you? Maybe both. Sarah smiled, rare and genuine. Maybe both, she agreed. She turned the horse toward the north, toward the ridges and canyons where her people waited. Sarah? She looked back. Come back, Thomas said. Whatever you and this Nakai decide, whatever offer you make or don't make, come back. Don't just disappear into the night. I need to know how this ends. I'll come back, Sarah promised. You have my word. Your word and $40. That's all I've got in this. It's more than most people ever get. She rode into the darkness, and Thomas stood in the yard watching her go, wondering if he'd just made the smartest decision of his life or the last decision he'd ever make. Charlie appeared beside him, rifle in hand. She won't come back. She will. You're betting your life on that. I'm betting all our lives on it. Then, you're a bigger fool than I thought. Thomas didn't argue. Maybe he was a fool. But he was a fool who'd looked into Sarah's eyes and seen something. He recognized someone, caught between impossible choices, trying to do right in a world that punished righteousness. Someone like him. Let's set up the watch rotation, Thomas said. It's going to be a long night. And it was. Sarah rode through the moonlit prairie, her heart hammering despite her outward calm. She knew where to go, had memorized the landmarks during her 2 weeks at the ranch. Past the north pasture fence, following the creek bed for 2 miles, then up into the rocky country where the mesquite gave way to juniper and the land broke into canyons and hidden draws. This was Comanche country, had been for 2 centuries, would be again if Nakai had his way. She saw the first scout when she was a mile from the rendezvous point, a shadow moving along a ridge, visible only because she knew where to look. Then another, and another. Nakai had posted sentries in concentric rings, making sure no one followed her, ensuring the meeting site remained secure, professional, careful. The marks of a leader who'd survived by being smarter than his enemies. The rendezvous point was a shallow canyon with steep walls, and only one entrance defensible, hidden, perfect for secret meetings. Sarah rode in slowly, hands visible, showing she was unarmed and alone. 30 warriors waited for her. They sat in a semicircle around a small fire, faces painted for war, weapons close at hand. Behind them, horses stood hobbled and quiet. The air smelled of wood smoke and sage and the particular tension that preceded violence. Nakai sat at the center, his face hard as flint in the firelight. Sarah dismounted, approached slowly, and performed the traditional greeting gesture, right hand over heart, then extended palm up toward Nakai. I come in peace. I come with respect. I come as one of the people. Nakai did not return the gesture. Tuanip, he said, his voice cold. Explain to me why I should not kill you where you stand. Sarah's breath caught. She'd expected anger, but not this. Not death threats before she'd even spoken. I've completed my mission, she said in their language, keeping her voice steady. I've infiltrated the white man's household, gathered intelligence, assessed the threat. I'm here to report. You're here to explain why you revealed our presence to the white man. Why you told him about Bitter Water Place. Why you compromised everything we've worked for. Nakai stood, and Sarah saw the barely controlled fury in his stance. Did you think we wouldn't see? That we wouldn't notice you and him talking in the house? Your body language changing. The way he looked at you afterward. I made a strategic decision. You made an emotional decision. You forgot who you are. Forgot what you're fighting for. You've been playing house with the enemy for 2 weeks, and now you've forgotten which side you're on. That's not true, isn't it? Nakai stepped closer. Tell me, Tuinap, when you cook his food, clean his house, wear his dead wife's clothes, do you remember that men like him drove us from our lands? Do you remember that white ranchers like Thomas Brennan built their wealth on our suffering? Or have you forgotten in the comfort of a warm bed and regular meals? Sarah felt anger rise, hot and sharp. I've forgotten nothing. I've lost as much as you, Nakai. My parents died on the reservation. My brother died fighting cavalry at Palo Duro. Don't you dare question my loyalty. Then explain your actions. Sarah took a breath, forcing herself to calm. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about preventing a war. I told him about Bitter Water Place because he was planning to dig there within 2 weeks. I had no choice, either warn him or watch him stumble onto the burial site unknowingly. And if he'd found it on his own, without understanding what it was, he would have brought in cavalry and archaeologists and government officials. We would have lost everything. At least this way, he knows. He understands the stakes. And he's considering our offer to buy the land. Considering, Nakai repeated. Not accepting, considering. It's been 2 weeks, Nakai. Building trust takes time. We don't have time. Nakai returned to the fire, gestured for Sarah to sit. The other warriors remained silent, watching, judging. The cavalry has increased patrols in this area. They know something's happening, even if they don't know what. We have maybe 1 more month before they find this canyon, find our camp, and we're forced to run again. We need that land secure before then. We need Brennan gone. Then let me complete the negotiation. He's reasonable. He's considering the offer. Why should I trust your assessment? You've been compromised. I haven't been compromised. I've been effective. Sarah leaned forward. Nakai, think about what I've accomplished. I'm inside his house. He trusts me enough to let me ride out here alone. He's listening to our perspective. If I'd come in with hostility, if I'd maintained pure antagonism, he would have thrown me out or turned me over to the cavalry already. Instead, he's negotiating. That's a victory. Nakai's sister, Wakari, spoke for the first time. The girl makes sense, brother. Hot war now serves no one. If there's a chance for Cold War for victory through negotiation, shouldn't we take it? Cold War requires both sides to respect each other, Nakai countered. How do we know Brennan respects us? How do we know he's not simply stalling while he plans his next move? Because I know him, Sarah said quietly. These 2 weeks, I've observed him carefully. He's a decent man caught in an impossible situation. His wife died. His ranch is failing. He's holding onto his land for emotional reasons, not just financial ones. If we approach him right, if we honor that emotion while still protecting our interests, I think he'll sell. You think, Naka said. But you don't know. No one knows anything for certain in negotiation. But I believe I'm right. Nakai studied her for a long moment, his face inscrutable. Finally he spoke. What does he want? Proof. He wants to see the burial site. Every warrior around the fire stiffened. One of them, a young warrior named Kasai, stood abruptly. Absolutely not. No white man has ever seen Bitter Water Place. No white man ever will. Then he won't sell, Sarah said flatly. He needs to know what he's protecting. Needs to understand why it matters. You're asking him to give up his life's work on faith, and he's too practical for that. He's white, Kasai spat. That should be reason enough to exclude him. There are no such white men, Nakai said. I used to think that too, but I'm not sure anymore. Silence. Wakari spoke again, her aged voice carrying weight. If we refuse to show him, he digs anyway. If he digs, he finds the burial site. If he finds it, cavalry comes. Cavalry comes, we lose everything. So the question isn't whether to trust this white man. The question is whether we have any choice but to try. Nakai rubbed his face, and Sarah saw in that gesture all the exhaustion of a man carrying impossible burdens. If I agree to this, if I allow him to see Bitterwater Place, and he betrays us, brings in authorities, violates the sacred ground, what then, Tuanip? Sarah met his eyes. Then I'll kill him myself. The words hung in the air, stark and uncompromising. You mean that? Nakai asked. I mean it. I'll do whatever is necessary to protect our people. But I'm asking you to give me one more chance to do it without bloodshed. Nakai looked around the circle, silently polling his warriors. Sarah couldn't read their faces, couldn't tell if they were with him or against him. Finally, he nodded slowly. 4 days. You have 4 more days to complete this negotiation. If Brennan agrees to sell in that time, we proceed with the purchase. If he refuses, or if he takes any action toward digging that well, we attack. Immediately and without warning. And showing him the site? Nakahai grimaced. I'll take him myself. Tomorrow night. Just him, no other whites. He sees what's there. He makes his decision. And this ends one way or another. Relief flooded through Sarah, though she kept her face neutral. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This could still end in disaster. Nakai stood, signaling the meeting was ending. Go back to his ranch. Tell him he has an audience with me tomorrow night. Same place, same time. He comes alone, unarmed, on foot. If he brings weapons or friends, we'll consider it a declaration of war and respond accordingly. He'll come. For your sake, he better. Because if this goes wrong, Tuanip, it's your failure. And I won't be merciful. Sarah mounted her horse, knowing she'd pushed Nakai as far as he could be pushed. 4 days wasn't much, but it was something. As she rode back toward the ranch, she replayed the conversation in her mind, looking for weaknesses, planning her next moves. She'd bought time, but she'd also raised the stakes. Now everything depended on Thomas Brennan's reaction to tomorrow's meeting. Would he see it as an opportunity? Or a trap? Would he trust her enough to walk into Comanche territory alone and unarmed? Would he understand what Nakai was offering, a chance for peace negotiated between equals, or would he see only danger and deception? Sarah didn't know, but she'd find out soon enough. The eastern sky was just starting to pale when Sarah rode back into the bar tea yard. Thomas was waiting for her, standing by the corral with a rifle across his lap, exactly where she'd left him 6 hours ago. He stood when he saw her, relief visible on his face even in the pre-dawn gloom. You came back. I said I would. I know. But saying and doing are different things. Thomas took the reins of her horse, helped her dismount even though she didn't need help. What happened? What did they say? Sarah pulled off her riding gloves, her hands stiff from the cold. Nakasa meet with you, tomorrow night. Same place I went tonight. Just you, alone, unarmed. Thomas absorbed this. And if I agree? He'll show you Bitterwater Place, let you see what's buried there. Then you decide sell to us, or dig your well and face the consequences. That's it? No negotiations? No middle ground? That's it. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. You understand what you're asking? You want me to walk into hostile territory, alone and unarmed, to meet with a Comanche war leader who has every reason to kill me. Yes, on your word that I'll be safe. On my word that Nakai wants peace more than he wants your blood. But yes, ultimately, you'd be trusting me. And if I refuse? Sarah met his eyes. Then in 4 days, Nakai attacks. He burns your ranch, kills anyone who resists, and takes the land by force. The cavalry will come eventually, but by then, it'll be too late. You'll be dead. The burial site will be re-hidden, and Nakai's band will disappear into the staked plains, where no one will find them. Those are my choices, suicide or slaughter. Those are your choices. I'm sorry they're not better. Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. Mary would have found this funny. She always said I was too trusting for my own good. Guess she was right. So you'll go? Do I have a choice? There's always a choice, Mr. Brennan. But some choices lead to life, and some lead to death. I'm offering you the one that might let everyone survive this. Thomas looked at the eastern horizon, where the sun was just starting to break through. A new day. Maybe the last peaceful one he'd have. All right, he said finally. I'll go, tomorrow night. Alone and unarmed. I'll meet your Nakai and see this sacred ground and make my decision. He turned to face her. But Sarah, if this is a trap, if I walk into that canyon and don't walk out, Charlie and Miguel will bring the cavalry down on your people like the wrath of God. You understand that? I understand. Good. Then we have an understanding. They stood in the yard as the sun rose, two people from different worlds who'd somehow become entangled in each other's fates. And Sarah wondered if any of them, Thomas Nakai, herself, truly understood what they'd set in motion. Because peace was a delicate thing, easily shattered. And they were all carrying hammers. The next day passed in strange suspension. Everyone knew something critical was coming, but no one spoke of it directly. Thomas went through the motions of ranch work, checking water levels and inspecting equipment. Charlie watched Sarah like a hawk, clearly convinced she was leading Thomas to his death. Miguel tried to ease the tension with his usual optimism, but even he couldn't deny the weight in the air. Sarah cooked and cleaned and tried not to think about all the ways tomorrow night could go catastrophically wrong. At dinner, Thomas finally addressed the situation directly. Tonight, I'm meeting with Sarah's people. I'll be gone from sunset to dawn. While I'm away, Charlie's in charge. If I'm not back by first light, ride to Fort Conco and get the cavalry. Tell them everything about Sarah, about Bitter Water Place, about hostile Indian activity. Don't hesitate, don't negotiate, just bring overwhelming force. You're really doing this, Charlie said, shaking his head. I'm really doing this. You're insane. Probably. But what's my alternative? Wait for them to attack? I'd rather meet them on neutral ground. Try to work this out, than wait to fight a war I can't win. Miguel spoke up. I think you're brave, Senator Brennan. My grandmother, she would have respected this. Meeting your enemies, trying to find peace. That's harder than fighting. Or stupider, Charlie muttered. Maybe both, Thomas agreed. He turned to Sarah. You're coming with me? To guide you, yes. But once we reach the canyon, I'll leave. This meeting is between you and Nakai. And if he decides to kill me, then I'll have failed. And my people will have lost their last best chance at peace. Sarah's voice was steady. But I don't think he'll kill you, Mr. Brennan. Nakai survived this long by being smart, not by being reckless. Killing you serves no purpose. Negotiating with you might save us all. After dinner, Thomas prepared for the journey. He followed Sarah's instructions exactly. No weapons, plain clothes, his oldest boots in case they had to walk rough country. He felt naked without his pistol, vulnerable without his rifle. But he also understood the symbolism. He was coming as a supplicant, not a conqueror. As a man seeking understanding, not a soldier seeking battle. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Thomas said his goodbyes to Charlie and Miguel. If I don't make it back, he told them, divide my possessions between you. Charlie, you get the ranch or whatever can be sold. Miguel, you get my personal effects. There's a letter in my desk drawer for the bank, releasing my debts from any personal obligation. You're both free men, no matter what happens to me. Stop talking like you're going to die, Miguel said, his voice thick. I'm talking like a man who knows the risks. But I don't plan on dying. I plan on coming back with a solution that saves everyone. Fool's hope, Charlie said. But he shook Thomas's hand anyway, holding it longer than necessary. Sarah appeared from the house, dressed again in traditional Comanche clothing, her hair braided, her face set with determination. "It's time," they rode out together into the gathering dusk, leaving Charlie and Miguel standing in the yard like mourners at a funeral. The journey took 2 hours, following paths visible only to Sarah's experienced eyes. They didn't speak much. What was there to say? Everything had been said already. Now came the moment of truth. When they reached the canyon entrance, Sarah stopped. "This is where I leave you. Follow the canyon back about 300 yards. You'll find a fire and men waiting. Nakai will be the one in the center, the oldest one. Show respect but don't grovel, he'll interpret subservience as weakness. Speak plainly, honestly. Answer his questions. And remember, he's not your enemy. He's a leader trying to protect his people, same as you. What if he doesn't believe me? What if I say the wrong thing? Then trust will fail, and we'll all pay the price." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "But I don't think that will happen. You're a good man, Thomas Brennan. Even Nakai will see that, if you let him." Thomas dismounted, took a deep breath, and started walking into the canyon. Behind him, he heard Sarah ride away, leaving him truly alone. The canyon walls rose steep on either side, blocking out the last light of day. The sand beneath his boots was soft, muffling his footsteps. Ahead, he could see the flickering of firelight and smell wood smoke. 30 Comanche warriors, 1 white rancher, no weapons. No backup, no way out except through conversation. "Mary," Thomas thought, "if you can see this, I hope you understand. I'm doing what you would have done. I'm trying to choose the brave thing instead of the easy thing." He rounded a bend in the canyon and saw them exactly as Sarah had described. Warriors sitting in a semicircle, weapons close but not held. And in the center, a man of about 40 with a face that had seen too much and forgiven too little. "Nakai." Thomas walked forward slowly, hands visible, posture open. When he was 10 feet from the fire, he stopped and spoke in the careful Spanish he'd learned from Miguel, gambling that Nakai would understand it, even if he didn't speak English. "I am Thomas Brennan. I come in peace. I come to negotiate. I come to understand." Nakai studied him for a long moment, then replied in perfect, unaccented English, "I know who you are, white man. The question is whether you know who I am. Sit. We have much to discuss." Thomas sat, crossing his legs, trying to look relaxed despite the hammering of his heart. And so began the most important conversation of his life, a dialogue between enemy and enemy, between the man who claimed land by law and the man who claimed it by blood, between someone who wanted to build a future and someone who wanted to preserve a past, between 2 men who both understood that what happened next would determine whether the sun rose on peace or war. For the first 10 minutes, they simply looked at each other across the fire, not speaking, not moving, just taking each other's measure the way wolves do before deciding to fight or flee or cooperate. Thomas saw in Nakai's face the map of every loss, every battle, every compromise forced upon a proud people. Saw the intelligence behind the hard eyes, the calculation in the set of his jaw. This was not a mindless savage. This was a general without an army, a king without a kingdom, a man fighting an endless retreat against an enemy that never tired and never showed mercy. What Naka saw in Thomas's face, Thomas couldn't know. But eventually, the Comanche leader spoke. "Tuanip says you are different, that you are reasonable, that you might understand what others cannot." Nakai's voice was measured, controlled. "I hope she's right. Because if she's wrong, many people will die, including you." "I hope she's right too," Thomas said quietly. "Tell me, Thomas Brennan, why did you buy her?" The question was unexpected. Thomas had prepared for questions about the land, about his intentions, about his willingness to negotiate. But this? "I bought her because it was wrong not to," Thomas said finally. "Because leaving her to be sold to someone else felt like participating in something I couldn't live with. So you bought her out of guilt, maybe, or maybe out of recognizing that she was a person, not property, and that the only thing I could do in that moment was make sure she didn't end up somewhere worse." Nakai considered this. "And yet, you still bought her. You didn't challenge the traitor, didn't free her immediately, didn't fight the system that made her sail possible in the first place. You participated in the thing you claimed to oppose. Thomas felt the truth of that like a punch to the gut. You're right. I didn't do enough. I did the minimum that my conscience required and told myself it was sufficient. That's a failing. At least you admit it. Nakai picked up a stick, poked at the fire. Do you know what the worst thing about your people is, Thomas Brennan? It's not the cruelty. It's not even the conquest. It's the way you convince yourselves that small kindnesses excuse great injustices. You buy one slave to save her from a worse fate, but you don't question the system that creates slaves. You give food to a starving Comanche child on a reservation, but you don't ask why the 1:13 p.m. child is starving in the first place. You commit murder by degrees and call it civilization. The words burned, but Thomas didn't look away. You're right. I know I'm right. The question is whether you knowing I'm right changes anything. What do you want it to change? Everything. Nothing. I don't know anymore. Nakai threw the stick into the fire, watched it catch and burn. 20 years ago, I would have killed you on sight. Would have counted it a victory. One less white man taking Comanche land. 10 years ago, I would have tried to drive you off, burn your ranch, make you understand that this land wasn't yours to claim. But now, he gestured at the warriors around them. Now I have 40 men left. 40 men out of a nation that once numbered 30,000. We're dying, Thomas Brennan. Not in battle, but in pieces. Starvation, disease, despair, and no amount of fighting will change that. Then why fight at all? Because some things matter more than survival. Pride, honor, memory. Nakai looked at him directly. Do you understand that? That sometimes the right thing to do is resist even when resistance is futile. Thomas thought about Mary, about his promise to her, about holding onto the ranch even as it killed him. Yes, I understand that. Good. Then maybe we can talk like men instead of enemies. For the next hour, they talked. About the land, about history, about competing claims and impossible choices. Nakai spoke of the burial site at Bitter Water Place, though he didn't yet offer to show it. Explained what it represented, not just records and artifacts, but proof of existence. Proof that the Comanche had been more than raiders and warriors, that they'd had art and culture and civilization by any meaningful definition. Thomas listened, asked questions, tried to understand a perspective so different from his own that it felt like learning a new language. Why didn't your people write things down? Thomas asked at one point. Keep records like Europeans do? We did, Neka said, just not in ways you recognize as writing. Pictographs, winter counts, oral histories passed down through generations with perfect accuracy. Your people mistake different for absent. We had writing, we had history, we had law. Just not your versions of them. And that's what's buried at Bitter Water Place? Your versions? Among other things. What other things? Nakai smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's what I'll show you. If you agree to come, if you swear to keep what you see secret, I'll take you to the burial site. Let you see with your own eyes why this matters. Why we can't let you dig there, and then you decide. Sell us the land and walk away with enough money to start over. Or refuse, dig your well, and face the consequences. Which are war. Not immediately, we're not fools, but eventually. When you least expect it, when your guard is down. We'll strike, and we'll strike hard, and we'll take back what's ours even if it costs us everything. Thomas believed him. Not because Nakai seemed violent, but because he seemed resolved. This was a man who'd made peace with his own mortality, which made him infinitely dangerous. How much are you offering? Thomas asked. Nakai named a figure. It was fair, not generous, but fair. Enough to pay off Thomas's mortgage and debts with a little left over to start somewhere new. That's reasonable, Thomas admitted. We're not trying to cheat you. We're trying to protect something that matters to us more than money. Money we can find. Sacred ground, once desecrated, can never be restored. I need to see it, Thomas said. I need to understand what I'd be protecting. What I'd be giving up my home for. Then come. Nakasi stood, gestured for Thomas to follow. Tonight, you see Bitter Water Place. You see what your people would destroy. And then you make your choice. They walked out of the canyon, accompanied by two of Naka's warriors, silent men who moved like shadows. They walked for over an hour, across open prairie and into rocky country, where the land folded into hidden valleys and dry creek beds. The moon was full, lighting their way, casting everything in silver and black. Finally, they came to a place where the land dipped slightly and mesquite trees grew in a rough circle. In the center of the circle, barely visible, was a stone marker. "This is Bitter Water Place," Nakai said. "Named for the tears of the mothers who buried their children here during the smallpox epidemic in 1748. Named for the bitterness of loss. Named for the waters that run beneath, which our people have always known were sacred." He knelt beside the stone marker, and his warriors did the same. Thomas, uncertain, knelt too. Nakai spoke a prayer in Comanche, his voice rising and falling in rhythms. Thomas couldn't follow, but somehow understood anyway. It was a prayer of mourning, of memory, of fierce determination that the dead would not be forgotten. When he finished, Nakai turned to Thomas. "Do you see that mark on the stone?" Thomas leaned closer. In the moonlight, he could just make out a symbol carved into the weathered surface, a spiral with 4 lines radiating outward. "What does it mean?" "It means here lies truth. It's a promise made by our ancestors to their descendants. A promise that no matter what happened to our people, no matter how scattered or destroyed we became, there would always be this place, this ground, this proof that we mattered." Nakai gestured to his warriors, who produced shovels hidden nearby. Thomas realized, prepared for this moment. They began to dig, carefully, reverently, removing earth in small increments. 20 minutes later, they'd exposed a stone chamber about 4 feet below the surface. Nakai reached in, pulled out a wrapped bundle. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing what looked like a large piece of buffalo hide, painted with intricate designs and symbols. "This is one of 37 documents buried here," Nakai said. "This particular one is a treaty map, showing the boundaries between Comanche bands circa 1720. It proves we had governance, territorial agreements, diplomatic relations between different groups. It proves we weren't just wandering savages, as your history books claim." He pulled out another bundle. "This is a winter count, recording every significant event in our history from 1650 to 1850. 200 years of memory, preserved. Births, deaths, battles, alliances, natural disasters, spiritual revelations. Our entire story, written by our own hands." Another bundle. "This is a collection of stories, what you might call literature. Tales of heroes and tricksters, moral lessons, creation myths. Culture, Thomas Brennan. Proof of culture." And finally, one more bundle. Nakai unwrapped this one with particular care, and Thomas saw why. It was a star chart. Intricate, detailed, showing constellations and planetary movements with a precision that suggested serious astronomical knowledge. "We tracked the stars," Nakai said quietly. "Understood their patterns. Used them for navigation, for tracking seasons, for religious ceremonies. We were not primitive. We were different. And difference is not inferiority." Thomas stared at the documents laid out in the moonlight, feeling something shift in his understanding of the world. He'd grown up hearing that Indians had no written language, no history, no real culture. That they were obstacles to progress, unfortunate casualties of inevitable civilization. But here, in his hands, was proof that those teachings were lies. "This is," Thomas struggled for words. "This is incredible. This belongs in a museum, where everyone can see it, where—" "No," Nakai cut him off sharply. "This belongs to us. Not displayed behind glass for white tourists. Not studied by white scholars who'll use it to write their own version of our story. This stays here, protected by us, for us, until the day we decide, if we ever decide to share it with the world. But people should know. Should they?" Should we share our most sacred possessions with the people who stole our land, killed our families, destroyed our way of life? Why? So they can feel better about what they did. So they can say, oh, the Indians had culture after all. How noble. Nakai's voice dripped with bitterness. We don't need your validation, Thomas Brennan. We know who we are. This burial is for us, to remind us, to preserve for our children and their children. Not for your people. Thomas understood, even as it broke something in him to realize these treasures would remain hidden. But there's something else here, Thomas said slowly, realizing. Something more than historical documents. Sarah said there was something valuable enough to kill for. These are important, but Nakai smiled grimly. Smart. Yes, there's something else. Something I'm only showing you because if you dig here, you'll find it anyway, and you'll bring every treasure hunter in Texas down on this spot. He reached into the chamber, pulled out a small leather pouch, opened it. Silver ore. Rich, pure, unmistakable silver ore. There's a vein running underneath this entire valley, Nakafai said. Has been for thousands of years. Our people knew about it, mined small amounts for jewelry and decoration. Never told the Spanish, never told the Mexicans, never told your people. Because we knew what would happen if whites learned there was silver here, they'd tear the earth apart to get it. Would destroy the burial site, destroy the sacred ground, destroy everything in their endless hunger for wealth. Thomas felt his stomach drop. Silver, of course. That explained everything. The desperation, the willingness to kill, the absolute refusal to allow him to dig. How much silver? Enough to make you rich. Enough to make this land worth killing for. Enough to bring miners and soldiers and settlers by the thousands. Neka put the ore back, carefully resealed the chamber. Do you understand now? If you dig your well, you'll hit the vein within 30 feet. Once you do, word will spread. And this place, this sacred ground, these irreplaceable documents, this last piece of our heritage, will be destroyed in the rush for profit. His warriors began filling in the hole, replacing the earth, hiding the chamber again. Thomas stood there in the moonlight, feeling the weight of impossible knowledge. His land, the land he'd worked and bled for, the land Mary had loved, sat on top of a fortune. A fortune that could save him, could make him wealthy beyond imagining. And all he had to do was destroy the last tangible proof that an entire civilization had existed. You're asking me to walk away from this, Thomas said. To sell you land that's worth 10 times, 100 times what you're offering. Yes. Why would I do that? Because you're a man who bought a Comanche woman to save her from a worse fate, even though it cost you everything you had. Because you're a man who's listened to me for 3 hours instead of dismissing me as a savage. Because somewhere in you, Thomas Brennan, there's a piece of conscience that knows the difference between what you can do and what you should do. Nakai stepped closer. I'm not appealing to your charity. I'm appealing to your sense of justice. This land was ours first. This silver was ours first. These documents, this history, this memory, all ours. Your ownership is a legal fiction built on conquest and broken treaties. We both know that. The only question is whether you're man enough to acknowledge it. Thomas looked at the refilled hole, at the unremarkable ground that hid such remarkable treasures. Looked at Nakai, waiting for an answer. Looked at the Comanche warriors, hands on weapons, ready to die for this worthless-looking patch of earth. I need time to think, Thomas said. You have 3 days. Then I need your answer. And if I say no? If I choose to keep my land, dig my well, take my chances? Then we kill you, kill your men, burn your ranch. And if the cavalry comes, we disappear into the staked plains and wait for another chance. We've been patient for 30 years, Thomas Brennan. We can be patient for 30 more. That's not a negotiation. That's a threat. It's a promise. But it's also an offer. Sell us the land. Take the money. Walk away. Live your life somewhere else with enough resources to start over, and the knowledge that you did the right thing. Or stay, dig, get rich, and live with the knowledge that you destroyed something irreplaceable for profit. Nakai extended his hand. 3 days. Then we see what kind of man you really are. Thomas shook it, feeling the calluses, the strength, the absolute conviction. They walked back to the canyon in silence. When they arrived, Nakai stopped. Sarah tells me you're decent. I'm beginning to think she might be right. But decent isn't enough, Thomas Brennan. The world doesn't reward decent. It rewards ruthless, rewards greedy, rewards those willing to take what they want regardless of cost. He paused. Prove her right. Prove that decent can win, just this once. Then Thomas was walking back through the canyon alone, finding Sarah waiting with the horses at the entrance, riding through the darkness toward his ranch and the choice that would define the rest of his life. When they arrived at the bar T as dawn broke, Charlie was waiting in the yard, rifle ready. You're alive. I'm alive. And? Thomas dismounted, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. And I have 3 days to decide whether to be rich or right. I'll tell you more after I've slept. He stumbled into the house, fell onto his bed fully clothed, and slept the sleep of a man who'd seen too much truth in one night. And dreamed of Mary, asking him, "What kind of man are you, Thomas? The kind who takes everything he can get? Or the kind who knows when to stop?" He woke 12 hours later with his answer. Thomas spent the next day in solitude, walking his land, touching fence posts and barn walls, running his hands over the things he and Mary had built together. He sat in her sewing room, Sarah's room now, and remembered the sound of her laugh, the way she'd hum while she worked, the fierce determination she'd brought to every challenge. What would you do, Mary? But he already knew. Mary would have chosen people over profit every time. Would have seen the choice as obvious, not difficult. The difficulty was in his own attachment to this place, to the life they'd imagined here, to the promises he'd made. But promises to the dead, Thomas realized, shouldn't outweigh obligations to the living. That evening, he called everyone together, Charlie, Miguel, and Sarah. "I'm selling," he said without preamble. "I'm accepting Nakai's offer. The Barty Ranch goes to the Comanche." Charlie's face went through several expressions before settling on resigned acceptance. "You saw something out there, something that changed your mind. I saw enough. Care to share?" "No, I promised I'd keep it secret, and I intend to honor that." Miguel smiled. "I'm glad, Senator Brennan. I think this is right. Maybe, or maybe I'm just too tired to keep fighting." Thomas looked at each of them in turn. "The sale will take a few weeks to finalize legal paperwork, transferring deeds, all that. During that time, you're all still employed. After that, Charlie, you'll get a severance of 6 months' wages. Miguel, the same. That should give you both time to find new positions." "What about you?" Charlie asked. "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet. Maybe back east, maybe California. Maybe just to another town where nobody knows me and I can start over without Mary's ghost around every corner." "And me?" Sarah asked quietly. "You're free. You've been free since the moment you told me the truth. Whether you stay through the sale or leave tonight, that's your choice." Sarah nodded slowly. "I'll stay. See this through. Make sure the transition happens smoothly. Thank you." That night, Sarah rode out again to deliver Thomas's decision to Nakai. She returned before dawn with confirmation. The sale would proceed. Papers would be drawn up. Money would be transferred. In 1 month, Bitter Water Place would be protected. The Barty Ranch would be Comanche property, and Thomas Brennan would be a man without a home. The next few weeks passed in strange limbo. Thomas rode into town to consult with lawyers, arranged the legal transfer, endured the questions and judgment from white neighbors who couldn't understand why he'd sell to Indians. The sheriff stopped by twice, asking if Thomas was being coerced, if there was any threat. Thomas assured him the sale was voluntary, though he offered no explanation beyond personal reasons. Rumors spread. Some said Thomas had found gold on his land and the Indians were paying top dollar for mineral rights. Others claimed he'd been threatened, or that he'd lost his mind after Mary's death. A few whispered that he'd taken up with the Comanche woman, that she'd seduced him into betraying his own people. Thomas ignored it all. Let them think what they wanted. He knew the truth, and that was enough. Sarah remained at the ranch through the entire process, though her role shifted. She was no longer an employee, but a liaison, facilitating communication between Thomas and Nakai, helping smooth the legal complications of selling land to Indians in a state that barely recognized them as human. And slowly, cautiously, something like friendship developed between Thomas and Sarah, not the uneasy cooperation of the first weeks, but genuine respect. They talked in the evenings after work, sharing stories of their lives, their losses, their hopes for whatever came next. "What will you do after this?" Thomas asked one night. "Return to my people. Help them establish legal ownership. Help them plan how to protect the burial site permanently. Maybe teach some of the children to read and write English, not because English is superior, but because knowing the enemy's language is strategic. And personally, what do you want?" Sarah was quiet for a long time. "I want to live long enough to see my people remembered for what we really were, not the caricatures your history books create. I want to die knowing that Bitter Water Place is secure. Beyond that," she shrugged, "I learned a long time ago that personal wants are a luxury people like me can't afford. That's sad. That's survival." On the last day of the sale, Thomas, Sarah, Nakai, and a lawyer from town met at the ranch to sign the final papers. The lawyer was deeply uncomfortable, clearly disapproving, but he did his job professionally. Money changed hands, not in cash, but in a bank draft that represented funds pooled from various Comanche sources. The deed was transferred. The Barty Ranch officially became Comanche property. "It's done," the lawyer said, packing up his papers. "Though I still think you're making a mistake, Brennan." Noted. After the lawyer left, Nakai extended his hand to Thomas. "You're a strange man, Thomas Brennan. I don't understand you. But I respect you. That's more than I can say for most whites. I don't understand myself half the time," Thomas admitted. "But I know what Mary would have wanted. And for once I did it. Your wife must have been a remarkable woman." "She was." Nakai turned to leave, then paused. "If you ever need anything, help, shelter, protection, you're welcome in our territory. You're a friend to the Comanche. That's not a title many white men can claim. I appreciate that." After Nakai left, Thomas stood in the yard of the ranch that was no longer his, feeling strangely light. Free, in a way he hadn't felt since Mary died. All the weight of obligation and promise, and desperate clinging to the past gone. Sarah approached quietly. "You did the right thing. I hope so. You did. And my people won't forget it. Your name will be remembered, Thomas Brennan, as the white man who chose honor over gold. I doubt that'll be worth much in the history books. History books are written by winners. But memory is kept by the people who matter. And will remember." Charlie and Miguel emerged from the bunkhouse, their possessions packed, ready to ride out. "Where will you go?" Thomas asked. "I got a cousin in San Antonio who runs a freight business," Charlie said. "Might see if he needs an old cavalry scout who's too stubborn to retire." He offered his hand. "Been an honor, Thomas. Even when you were being an idiot, it was an honor." Thomas shook it, fighting unexpected emotion. "Take care of yourself, Charlie. You too. Try not to get yourself killed wherever you end up." Miguel's goodbye was briefer, but no less heartfelt. "Vaya con Dios, Senator Brennan. My grandmother would have been proud to know you." Then they were riding away, two more pieces of Thomas's old life disappearing into the distance. Sarah was the last to leave. She'd changed back into traditional dress, packed her few belongings, prepared for the ride back to Nakai's camp. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for buying me, for listening, for choosing to see me as a person instead of a problem. Thank you for trusting me with the truth, and for helping me understand things I never would have figured out on my own." They stood there awkwardly, two people who'd become important to each other under the strangest circumstances, uncertain how to say goodbye. Finally, Sarah stepped forward and embraced him quickly, then pulled back before he could respond. "Be well, Thomas Brennan. Live long. Be happy. You've earned it. You too, Sarah, or Tuanip. Whoever you choose to be. Maybe both, she said with a slight smile. Maybe I can be both. Then she was riding away, and Thomas was alone. He spent one last night in the ranch house, sleeping in Mary's room, Sarah's room, listening to the wind and the coyotes and the vast silence of the prairie. In the morning, he loaded his possessions onto a wagon, took one last look at the place that had been his home, and drove away without looking back. He headed east, toward San Antonio, toward whatever came next. He had money in his pocket, skills in his hands, and something he hadn't felt in years, hope. Behind him, Nakai's warriors moved into the ranch, not as conquerors, but as guardians. They would live there, protect the burial site, maintain the fiction that it was just another struggling ranch in difficult country. They would erase the signs of Thomas's presence, gradually, carefully, until it was as if he'd never been there at all. And 50 feet below the ground at Bitterwater Place, the documents in silver and memory remained hidden, protected, waiting for a day when they might be shared with a world that had learned to listen instead of conquer. It would be a long wait. But the Comanche had always been patient. 5 years later, in a small town outside San Antonio, a man named Thomas Brennan ran a successful livery stable. He'd remarried a widow named Catherine, who understood loss and didn't ask too many questions about his past. They had a small house, a good business, and a life that was quiet and decent and satisfying. Sometimes late at night, Thomas would think about the ranch, about Mary, about Sarah and Nakai and the impossible choice he'd made. He never regretted it. One day, a Comanche woman rode into town. She was older now, her face showing the lines of hard living, but Thomas recognized her immediately. "Sarah, Thomas," she dismounted, smiled. "I heard you were here. Thought I'd see how you were doing." "I'm well, you?" "Well enough. The burial site is secure. My people are surviving. It's not the life we wanted, but it's life. That's something." They talked for an hour, catching up, sharing news. She told him about developments in the Comanche Nation, the slow adaptation to reservation life, the preservation efforts for their culture and language. He told her about the livery stable, about Catherine, about the simple peace he'd found. As she prepared to leave, Sarah handed him a small leather pouch. "What's this?" "A gift, from Nakai. He died last winter peacefully, in his sleep, which is more than most warriors get. But before he died, he asked me to give you this." Thomas opened the pouch. Inside was a piece of silver ore, polished smooth, about the size of his thumb. "He wanted you to know that you could have been rich," Sarah said, "that you chose honor over wealth. And that choice mattered to him, to all of us." Thomas felt his throat tighten. Tell him thank you. I hope he found peace." "He did. Because of you, he died knowing that Bitterwater Place was protected, that his people's memory was safe. That's as much peace as any leader can ask for." She mounted her horse, prepared to ride away one more time. "Sarah, will I see you again?" "Maybe, maybe not. But you'll be remembered, Thomas Brennan, in our stories, in our history, as the white man who listened, who understood, who chose right over easy. That's more than I deserve. No, it's exactly what you deserve." She rode away, and Thomas stood in the street of his small town, holding a piece of silver ore and thinking about choices and consequences, and the strange ways that doing right sometimes led to happiness. That night, he showed the silver to Catherine, told her the whole story, the first time he'd told anyone. She listened quietly, then kissed him. "I'm proud of you." "For what?" "Giving up a fortune?" "For being the kind of man who would. The world has enough people chasing wealth. It needs more people chasing honor." Thomas put the silver on his desk, where he could see it every day. A reminder of what he'd walked away from. A reminder of what he'd gained by walking away. And somewhere to the west, on land that was legally Comanche but practically unwanted by anyone who didn't know its secrets, warriors stood guard over a burial site that held the memory of a nation, protected it, preserved it, kept it safe for future generations who might, someday, live in a world where different didn't mean inferior, where history was written by everyone instead of just the victors, where cultures could coexist instead of one destroying the other. It would be a long time coming, that world. But the Comanche were patient. And now, thanks to one white rancher who'd chosen conscience over cash, they had time. The sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The wind whispered through the mesquite trees. The land endured, as it always had, as it always would. And beneath it all, hidden and safe, lay the truth of a people who had loved this land first, who had defended it fiercest, who had refused to be forgotten even when history tried its hardest to erase them. They were the Comanche. They were still here, and they always would be. The land remembers what we forget. The earth keeps secrets we no longer know to ask about. And sometimes, just sometimes, a single act of decency changes everything. Thomas Brennan never became famous. His name appears in no history books. He died in 1895, surrounded by family and friends, having lived a quiet, good life. But in Comanche oral tradition, his story is still told. The white rancher who walked away from silver. The man who listened. The one who understood that some things matter more than money. And at Bitter Water Place, where the grass grows green even in drought, and the mesquite trees stand in their ancient circle, the burial site remains undisturbed, waiting, remembering, proof that honor sometimes wins, even in a world that rewards ruthlessness. And that, perhaps, is the most radical act of all.
Thanks for watching this story till the end. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And before you go, check out these other amazing Western stories waiting for you next. Subscribe, like, and I'll see you on the next ride.